Hi everyone and welcome to the OMS. How are you all doing? I can see some great comments coming in via the chat. Brilliant. So just to introduce myself, my name's James. I'm the head of programs here at Insight Outreach, and I'm joined as well in the chat by our two co-founders, Joyce and Nick. So do look out for comments in the chat from either Joyce or Nick, because they'll be answering some of your questions there as well. It's really great to meet you all. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to see each other in future and meet each other a lot more. But today, this is an introductory session so that you can get a rough idea of what the OMS involves and how it all goes together in terms of that process. So first of all, congratulations for getting your place on the self-study program. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the self-study program is, how it differs from the main program. The most important thing to bear in mind is that on the self-study program, all the communication will come primarily from our side through those portals that you have hopefully found on the website through to you guys. And on those, you should have seen that there's a syllabus that you might want to take a little look at if you haven't had a chance already. There's also some key traits in that syllabus, 8 traits, which we think unite all of our students. Do take a read of that. And then we also have a learning log, which is a document that I'll discuss in a little more detail in a minute, but that's somewhere where you can keep up to date with all of the things that you're doing as part of our program and outside of that. Each month on the self-study program, you're also going to have a webinar a bit like this, which will be led by a variety of our mentors and our teams of undergraduates and graduates at Oxford and Cambridge to give you insight into all the particular parts of the process. On the self-study program, one thing I do have to emphasize is unfortunately you won't be getting a personal mentor. So you won't be working one-on-one with a mentor, but you will have access to mentors through webinars such as these. And that is one of the slight differences. So hopefully that makes sense. And congratulations everyone on getting your place on the self-study. Today is primarily all about answering your questions. Do bear in mind that there are only a couple of us and there are quite a few of you. So what I would say is do start asking your questions via the chat, but we are going to structure it a little bit by theme. You can see that Nick's just posted the first comment in the chat there, Nick's Ruti, so do watch out for his. And I can also see Harriet in our chat. Harriet is a former mentee on our program and has gone on to do great things, and I'll let her talk all about that rather than me. But yeah, look out for Harriet there as well. And I'll point out any other names that I can see from our team who are joining via the chat. If you haven't already, Harriet also does a fantastic job on our social media with lots of the team. So if you haven't found us on Instagram, I would recommend following that. I promise it's not just a plug. We do put important updates there, like interview guidelines and advice. So it can be really useful to keep up to date there. And if you want to make sure that you're always on time for these YouTube webinars, just clicking subscribe on that YouTube channel will help you there. Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to hand over to you guys now to ask any questions you have. And let's start perhaps with the OMS. So if you have any questions about the OMS, the self-study program, please just do ask away in the chat and we'll begin answering some of them. And then it says, what degrees are we studying? So I'll give a little introduction to everyone, but I won't speak. So I'm actually a graduate. So I graduated a couple of years ago and have been since working in education, which I absolutely love. While I was there, I studied classics. So that was kind of ancient languages. And in particular, I was doing lots of history and literature and philosophy. I believe Harriet, I'll let her introduce herself, but Harriet studies history. Nick studied natural sciences. Joyce studied history. I'm not sure if I see some of our other team members pop in as well, I'll let them know. I'll let you know what degrees they studied. Cool. So we've got some questions from Danny about the self-study program. So we had over 700 applications to OMS this year, which is a fantastic number. We're really looking forward to working with you all. And we gave out a huge amount of offers. Offers went up 300% in terms of the amount of offers we gave compared to last year. So there are a whole range of you on the self-study program, and we're really looking forward to working with you. We will begin splitting you up at various stages. So there will be webinars grouped by kind of 3 central strands. We've got maths-based subjects, which are like your maths, your physics, your chemistry, engineering, and so on. We've got humanities, which are hopefully fairly self-explanatory, but I would say economics we consider a humanity. And then we also have our last strand, which is our biosciences and medicine strand. So we will begin dividing you up by those strands so that you have plenty of opportunities to get more specific advice. Today remains quite a general session. Fantastic. Does OMS, so Sadia, your question, does OMS give guidance on the best way to approach Oxbridge scholarship applications? We will be able to help in terms of applying for all kinds of bursaries and extra applications to Oxbridge, yes. The main thing I would say there is there are also lots of information on the Oxford and Cambridge websites. We've linked them in the back of your self-study booklets, so do take a look there as well, but we'll be able to help with that for specific webinars. In particular, Oxbridge focus a bit more on bursaries rather than scholarships. They don't have many awards purely for academics. What they will do is help people who are struggling with finances by giving them grants and bursaries. So grants, you won't have to pay back any of that money at all, ever. And then you can also get the government to help with things like student loans. So those things will all help. The main thing that I would emphasize there is Oxbridge accept places on talent and potential alone. So if you have the ability, you don't need to worry too much about the finances. There are lots of people to help with that. So Bruck says, how many students that have taken part in the self-study program with OMS have got into Oxford and Cambridge? That's an excellent question, Bruck. So the self-study program is still fairly new. Unlike our main program, where this is kind of the fresh one, fresh off the block. So what I would say there is we don't actually have as much data for that there, but we are pretty confident in the syllabus that we use and how that works. So I can talk a little bit about that. In terms of our main syllabus, which we've been using to some extent since 2006, when Joyce was first using this alongside a full-time job. But when we were officially incorporated as a charity was 2018. That's when we expanded our syllabus. And since then, we've seen about a 40% success rate amongst our applicants. So that does in a large part rely on your guys' hard work as well, though. The main thing I want to emphasize is we are here to help, to guide and support. That primary input has to come from you, and we'll let you know how you can best channel some of those efforts and help. But primarily, I would say that an analogy I would give is I kind of want you to imagine us a bit like Sherpas guiding people up a mountain. I know this might sound a little long. Bear with it. I promise there's kind of a rationale behind this, in that we've been there, we've studied, as hopefully you can see from the jumper from my old college, St. Catherine's, and we do know that route. We can plot a route up the mountain, guide you along some of the way and kind of help you find that direction. But that does mean not everyone might make it to that top. You guys have to be the ones that put in the training, put in the preparation, and that will be the thing that helps you. We're there to help, but we can't guarantee that every single one of you with this program is going to find it perfect. That effort has to come in from you as well. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And I'm sorry for kind of the dampening of spirits on kind of how that works. But yeah, the success rate is in a large part thanks to our collaboration between us and you. Isabel says, are there any differences between the self-study and the real program? I would say do watch back at the start, and I kind of explain that in short. The main things I would say is you get more specific webinars. So you will get webinars with members of the team, but you don't get that small kind of one-on-one individual session or one-on-two individual session with mentors. There will be opportunities for you guys to meet mentors in small groups at various opportunities, but yes, that's one of the main differences. Debbie says, how does the program fit around school and workload? Great question, Debbie. What I would say here is on the workload side, this is manageable alongside your school studies. So this was a program that was developed by students. We listen to your feedback every single year in terms of what's manageable and what's not. And so we think we've got it down to a pretty good art now in terms of we'll give you content that can enhance your A-level studies, get you thinking about topics you might not be so familiar with to help you for those applications. but it should be something that primarily you guys work out when you have time to fit alongside your school studies. I would start dedicating some time to it each day. And on that front, I want to introduce you to something called a SMART goal today. And SMART, it stands for a specific goal. So start setting yourself some of these goals on how you might be able to think about your OMS preparation. And you'll see this in the syllabus. We want that goal to be specific. So rather than just saying, I'm going to prepare for Oxbridge, I'm going to read loads of books, I'm going to do loads of this, pick the names of those books, pick specific ones, and start thinking about how you're going to break that down. Make it measurable as well. So M for measurable. Think about how you can track that kind of progress on what you're doing. So is it that you're going to read a certain amount of chapters per week? Is it going to be that you're going to do a certain amount of practice questions per week? Also make it attainable, the A of SMART. So there's no point in saying you're going to be able to read 8 chapters if you're currently revising for exams or things like that. Set yourself attainable, realistic goals, okay? And then that are realistic ties quite closely into that in making sure that the goals you set are manageable. So think about how you can divide it up, that you get a range there and you get something that you're comfortable doing. And then the T is time bound. So always set yourself a deadline and try and keep that deadline. If you say you're going to read for an hour, read for an hour, and then that will kind of help mark the progress there. So that's one way that I recommend you can manage it alongside your schoolwork, but we do largely leave it to you guys to begin interpreting things like that. Brilliant. How easy is it to manage the workload of both school and OMS? I might ask Harriet to reply to that one in the chat, as she's done it very successfully. What I would say is it is very manageable and easy. I want to myth bust one thing straight away. I think there's quite a misconception that kind of Oxbridge is all work, no play. It's not true. It's definitely not true. When I was at Oxbridge, I was going clubbing 3 times in my first year. There were a load of extracurricular activities I could be involved in and everything like that. And that's the same kind of, you should still be doing these kind of things at school as well when you're preparing alongside OMS. Still do your extracurricular activities, still have fun, still meet up with your friends when that's possible and legal to do so. So it is manageable and it is very, very understandable there. The main thing is don't kind of set too high expectations on yourself. Keep that work consistent so you're doing a little bit each day rather than leaving yourself a stack to do right at the end of the process. Space it out and then it will be manageable. Start now and then you'll have plenty of time by August. If you leave it till May, you'll be a little more stressed, a little more rushed. Charlie says, will there be help in terms of the UCAT, which specific medicine exam? I'm going to kind of broaden that, Charlie, and talk about general kind of admissions tests that Oxford and Cambridge offer. Yes, we're comprehensive. So we will provide help and advice for all of the admissions tests, both in terms of general strategy and specific. I'm going to talk a little bit about general strategy, but we might have Joyce, Nick, or Harriet mention specific strategy in the comments. In terms of the general strategy, we'll give you advice on how you can best approach something, for example, like a multiple choice question. So one of the things that we quite commonly find is if everyone had 3 hours to do these admissions tests, I think everyone would do pretty well. You don't. They're quite tight on time. So what I would say there is in a multiple choice question, we can say if you're running short on time, let's start eliminating the answers that are definitely wrong. And so we get left with kind of 2 or 3 that it might be. Suddenly, instead of guessing and having a 20% chance of getting it right, we've got a 33 or 50% chance of getting it right. So we're going to give you tips and tricks and things like that to help with your admissions tests, ways that you can prepare and enhance your preparations there. So another question here, will we get help in prepping for interviews from Ben? Yes, also a definite. We will help you prepare for those interviews. The highlight of this is we have a conference in November. And in that November conference, we have both people, so guest speakers, and last year that was a Cambridge admissions tutor, so someone who runs the interview. And we also have a lot of our mentors who come along who have taken the interview and been successful. So you'll get advice from both sides of that process, what the admissions tutors looks for when they're running the interview, and also what we think will help you succeed there. We have something called learning frameworks to help with this. And if you're watching on the portals, you can probably see on the website, our portals, a section called learning frameworks. Things like our REAL framework for interviews, which means research, enthusiasm, analysis, lateral thinking. Our TIPS framework for maths, tools, information, proposal, state. Do get yourself acquainted with these, because these are some really good ways to help strengthen your interview preparation. Slightly later in the year, we'll be releasing some example questions of how these techniques have worked successfully for people in our interviews who have taken Oxbridge interviews and done well. So yes, we will definitely help with that. November conference and also all of those learning frameworks I just mentioned. There's a question of why were you accepted onto the self-study course rather than the other one? This is a really good question. And to be completely honest with you, I would absolutely love to take all of you onto the main program. The reality of that is we only have a certain amount of mentors, a certain amount of funding, and a certain amount of us on the central team. And for that reason, it means that we can only offer a specific number of places on that main program with a mentor. So the reason why you're on the self-study program is not kind of anything to worry about there. It's primarily done based on what we can afford as a charity and the amount of time and volunteers we have available. Every single person you meet at Insight Outreach volunteers their time for free. Everything that we give you is entirely free. So that's part of the reason there. I hope that makes sense. E. Jones, I'm sorry, I don't know the first name from that, but yeah. So do we get to interact with other students on the program, says Emily? That's a really good question, Emily. The short answer to that is in these webinars, absolutely. We encourage you to interact, share stories, etc. with each other. And as much as possible, we will kind of be breaking up these groups into those 3 strands so that you meet other people who are studying similar subjects to you. So we will kind of narrow it down and help with that, yes. In terms of, do we kind of put you in one-on-one calls with other students on the program? No, not exactly. But you will get opportunities each month to meet with students who are just as passionate about your subject. Do you recommend, so Hareen says, I wanted to ask, how do you recommend working through each trait on the list? So if you haven't had a look at our 8 traits yet, this is in your Mentee introduction booklets on the portal. And the way that works is we asked all of our former mentors and we asked lots of our former students, what traits do you think make a successful Oxbridge student? And we created kind of a syllabus, almost a list of these traits and effective behaviors that we think all of our successful candidates have shown, and then some ineffective behaviors that I would try and avoid in your drive to being one of those successful candidates. What I would say is that is kind of like, it's a tick sheet. So I would begin your preparations for the month, start doing some of your wider reading or start working through some of the problem questions when they're released. And then go to that tick sheet and think, when I was doing that, was I reading beyond the course, or was I just reading because someone had told me to read it? Am I showing signs of leadership and critical thinking already? Am I just reading the words on the page, or am I thinking about some of the advantages and disadvantages, whether I agree with what's being written there? If I couldn't work out the solution to a problem, did I just skip it and move on to question 2? Or did I think, right, how can I get a solution to this? What are other ways I could look about that problem and work around it? Maybe I could try and look up the answer online, or maybe I could go to YouTube and see if there's an answer there. So that's how I'd recommend using those 8 traits. I hope that clarifies it, Harini, and if not, do drop another question in and I can talk about it a little bit more. So Alex, yes, you will get aptitude test help, and rewind a little bit, and I can kind of, I've mentioned a little bit there. Yeah, there's quite a few questions about workload. What I would say in terms of the workload is, I promise it is manageable, but it's manageable because do space it out. Start now. I can't emphasize that enough. If you start now and you manage and you keep track of it in your learning log, this process really is manageable. People only start to get slightly more stressed if they leave it to the summer. So do start now, and that will be the best way we can help there. Another question here about personal statements. Yes, we definitely help with personal statements. We have a unique 6-paragraph structure for personal statements at Insight Outreach that we've developed, And we also have on record all of our successful students at Oxbridge who have used that structure. So you can not only learn the structure in general, but you can see the past statements of students for your subject and how they've been successful there. To very briefly run you through that, you don't need to worry about personal statements quite yet. That will be something for May and June time to begin thinking about. And what I would say there is, with that structure, start by brainstorming. Don't just try and kind of write it first of all. I would say my personal statement, it probably took me longer to write the first sentence than it did most of the rest of the personal statement, because it was a blank piece of paper staring me in the face and I had no idea where to start. So that brainstorming structure will help you get over that initial hurdle. And then you can kind of brainstorm what goes in these paragraphs. So for example, we have one on how you've gone beyond your A levels. We have one on the extracurricular activities that you're doing related to your subject and so on. So that will really help there. And again, it will come up later in the program. EPQs, I can see that Joyce is answering a couple of questions on EPQs, so do look out for her responses there. But yes, we certainly encourage EPQs. If you're not doing one, don't panic. Still perfectly possible to get into Oxbridge without an EPQ. But yes, of course, we recommend them. They're great, and they can also double up as pieces of submitted work. So what I mean by that is some Cambridge and Oxford colleges ask you, if you make it through the initial stage, to send you some examples of work that you've done. And an EPQ and a small section of that can form an excellent piece of submitted work to discuss. One question I would recommend preparing for that is they don't tend to kind of test your knowledge of the EPQ. So they won't go, you mentioned this, can you tell me about how that works? The most common question to be asked on something like an EPQ or a submitted work is, if you could do it again, what would you do differently? And I think that really embodies kind of the type of thinking that they're looking for in the Oxbridge preparation progress, about how you can self-reflect and self-improve. And those are skills that are essential to this OMS self-study program as well. James says, can you explain a little bit more about the interview workshop in November? Yes, I certainly can. So it's a full day workshop. Don't worry, there's breaks in there as well, completely. So what that will do is we'll run you through all of our frameworks. We'll have mentors give you examples of how they've used those frameworks successfully at interviews. We have a guest speaker, as we say, who last year was the admissions tutor, one of the admissions tutors for a college in Cambridge, who kind of talks to you a little bit about what he thinks are good ideas to do in the interview and what aren't quite so good ideas to do in the interview. And then we also have sessions where you go away in groups and brainstorm answers to lots of questions. The session then finishes as we have all of our mentors gathered together. We're very fortunate to have about 60, 70, 80 volunteers who are all current students or graduates from Oxford and Cambridge colleges who will be on hand to give you interviews in your subjects as well on that interview workshop day. So it's a great, really fun, or I find it really fun. I hope you guys do as well when we get there. Really fun part of the process. Lottie's asked that question on specific BTEC alongside A levels. I'm sure that one of our members of the team will pick that up in the chat, Lottie, but if not, that would be a great one to submit as an FAQ. So I can see lots of questions about exact dates. What I would say about this as well is we will always release everything via the portal this year. So that portal is kind of your first port of call for everything. Do also, if you haven't already, mark us as safe senders in terms of emails. So our emails are info, I-N-F-O, @insightoutreach.org. My email is james@insightoutreach.org. Various members of the team, just do look out in your spam or promotion folders for our emails and add us to safe senders list if you can, especially if you're at a school and you're using your school email address to sign up. Sometimes they can get a little bit blocked. So keep an extra close eye on those portals, because that's where we'll release all of the dates. We'll always try and give you a little bit of notice before each of the dates. And if you can't make any session, for example, like the session today, they're always recorded. So you can click on exactly the same link as would have worked to watch that session live, to watch it back at any point after the session finishes. Emily, that's a great question. Will it benefit your application if you mention you did this program in your personal statement? We have students every year who mention the OMS in their personal statement. We love it when people do. What I would say is it's far more about kind of, and this goes for everything in your personal statement, what you've learned from the program. So they want to know how it's encouraged you to think differently, how it's encouraged you to think critically, to creatively solve problems, to create solutions. That's how I would recommend mentioning the OMS if you do bring it up. If it's an example of how you've juggled work studies alongside an extra activity, you're doing it on the side. So they're not going to go OMS, oh yes, definitely we're accepting that person because they've been on an Oxbridge prep scheme like ours. It doesn't work like that. But if you want to mention it because of the skills that it teaches you, that's great and that's absolutely fine. My school does an EPQ in year 13. Should I try and get as much of it done as possible before applying, or is it not that worth it? I think it can vary slightly on subject as well. So if you know exactly what subject you want to study, great. If you don't panic. I'll come on to that in the second part of my answer. If you do though, yes, it can help to do an EPQ potentially. It can help with a bit of submitted work. It can give you a topic that you feel quite confident talking about. And so I would begin reading about it. Go with your school deadline. You don't need to rush it to try and get it done by the point of that interview, or that you have to submit all of it as submitted work. You can submit a small extract or some of the research you've done on it so far. So I think it can work, but don't kind of rush it or rush through just to do it for Oxbridge's sake. You should enjoy it as the extended projects are kind of a taster of the style of work you'll be doing more at university anyway. There are a couple of questions about, what if I don't know what I want to study yet? What if one of my passions is English and my other passion is chemistry? That was a situation that arose for me when I did both chemistry and English through in sixth form. So I was at one stage pretty torn between whether I was going like down the humanities or sciences route. Don't worry about that, would be my main thing. It would be my first port of call. So Oxford and Cambridge, in the back of your booklets that we give you, have great course pages that tell you all about the course and what's covered each year. I would recommend looking for those links or going to the Oxford and Cambridge websites and looking at those courses in a bit more detail. Which ones stand out to you? Which topics do you enjoy the most? And then going with your preferences there. We'll give you a chart in April with a series of kind of pros and cons and different stats about each of the courses that you can fill in for your favourite courses at Oxford and Cambridge. And from there, we'll then ask you to begin thinking about making a judgment as to which course you're best suited to. The reason why we do that quite early on is because by the time it gets to May and so on, and you're beginning to think about personal statements, if you are preparing completely different subjects, it can be pretty stressful. You've got to do almost double the work because you can't prepare for chemistry in the same way as you can prepare for English. You can't even prepare for maths in the same way as you prepare for physics, maybe. So that's why we encourage you to think about that quite early on. But please don't panic. You're not going to be asked what course you're doing in March and then be kept to that for the whole program. There's always rooms to swap and change as well. Where can we find the recommended reading lists? Great question. On the reading lists, they will be released pretty shortly. We're just getting the final things set up for the program this year now on those portals. And there's a section that you'll see with reading lists that you can't click quite yet. As soon as that's released, that's somewhere you can go. I want to talk a little bit about how to use those reading lists. So it doesn't work the way of if you read everything on our reading lists, you're much more likely to get a place. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. What we do on our reading lists will give you quite a specific list of resources at the start, because we don't want to give you like these 14-page reading lists that you can find online where you go, where on earth am I meant to start with this? And I have to like pick it based on which surname I like, which was one way that I once did it at uni, like picking surnames to work out which reading that I should start with. We don't do it like that. What we'll do is give you some general introduction books that are widely applicable for loads of different types of the course, parts of the course, the specific course that you're interested in. And I would start with one of them and then use it as a branching out point. So after you've read a couple of books on that reading list, maybe, let's say you're a history student and the chapter that you always love reading was the historiography of the Sino-Japanese War. Then after you've read about that, go away and read another book on the Sino-Japanese War that might not be on our reading list, that you can you found that topic interesting. Every time it comes up, go away and kind of focus on that topic a bit more. Maybe there's a specific type of maths problem that you always get stuck on and you want to improve, or maybe the opposite way around, there's one that you always love answering and you're always quite quick answering. Go away and do more of them as well. So those reading lists are a starting point, and when we release them, use them as that. Don't kind of feel like you have to read everything in the exact order we put it down. Just having a look at some of the other questions. If I accepted my offer slightly late, am I still on the program? Yes. The simple answer to all of this is yes. We are still open for any offers for people who are watching this. If you've been sent the offer and you haven't clicked accept yet, you can still accept. The reason why we put that deadline on the offers is so you can be here today watching these webinars, and it kind of, we didn't want it that you only found out and thought, oh, I can answer that on the weekend, and then found you've missed the first thing. So that was the deadline. You can still accept. You're still going to be given your place if you accept it slightly late. The main thing I would say, though, is the later you leave it on that, the more chance you do have of missing out on stuff. And when we kind of get more further into March, there will be a point at which we probably kind of restrict that portal a bit more. So if you haven't accepted, it should be #1 priority, please. So does the learning log include all things we have done to prepare for our application, or just the things in March? Great question. The learning log is used for every individual activity or thing you can do, and it will just ask you for 5 points on that, on what the activity was. So it's a really useful revision tool for later in the years. When you get to writing your personal statement, it means you have a huge list of activities already that you've talked about, you can consider, that you might otherwise have forgotten. And then when you get closer towards that admissions test interview stage, it also gives you more things that you can revise and reflect on that you might have forgotten if you did it back in March. So it runs all the way through. You can submit new entries at any point and then kind of view all of your entries together, print them off, or not print them off, view them online if you want to save trees, and then use it in that kind of way. So yes, it will work throughout the process, right the way through from March to December for the learning log. Are schools involved in this process? Great question, Debbie. We have collaborated with a lot of schools in terms of being able to let you know about the program and things like that, but we do run independently. So we're not there kind of having a chat with your teachers about how you're getting on at school or anything like that. And we don't kind of collaborate on things like personal statements or our resources, or kind of, we won't be appearing at some schools and not others. Everything we do is centrally organized through the OMS. If you're a little unsure on some of the words I'm mentioning, like learning log, 8 traits and things, which is absolutely fine, what I would say is do head over to those portals and read the syllabus and read the introductory booklet, and you can find all of the information you need on anything that I've been mentioning today that doesn't quite make sense there. And then you can always watch back this webinar as well to hear some of the advice we had on those parts of the process. So do you think a bunch of articles is good, as well as just kind of reading one academic book? I would really encourage you as well not to just think of Oxbridge in terms of reading. Definitely do, as Lou says, go for, or no, it's Isabel, I think actually, go for articles, go for shorter things. That's absolutely fine. Also do practical things, like try and organize some work experience if you can find something that's possible. If you enjoy that, if you enjoy being quite hands-on and practical, do problem questions online, watch YouTube videos, listen to podcasts. One of my favorites, there's In Our Time is a great podcast if you're a humanities student. If you want to do questions and you're an engineering student, I want to study engineering.com, great site for questions. There's also Isaac Physics. So there's loads of sites out there. We've linked quite a lot of them in our resources, and we'll release them as we kind of go through the process, but do have a look for all of that stuff. One thing I just want to mention there about other opportunities as well is we'll help you a lot on the OMS, and we do offer comprehensive preparation. There are also the opportunities, hopefully, if they're open, to go up and visit Oxford and Cambridge and do some summer schools there. Those are programs run by some great access charities. There's the Unique program in the summer and the Sutton Trust program. Their applications close on the 15th for their summer schools. So if you want a couple of weeks free of charge up in Oxford and Cambridge to have a think about that over the summer, alongside the support we'll give you on the OMS self-study programme, I would recommend applying in the next 24, 48 hours before the deadlines close there. I realise as well, I'm not answering every question here. Hopefully Nick and Joyce and Harriet as well are answering some of the more specific questions. I'm trying to pick some of the more general ones. So please, if I'm not answering your question, don't panic. It doesn't mean it's not a good question. It just means I'm trying to pick some of the more general ones. That said, there is a question on joint honours degrees with the example of computer science and mathematics from Gabrielle. Is the workload bigger than a single honours degree? No, is the short answer. So they will divide up that workload so it's more manageable. So if you're doing a joint honours degree, don't panic. You're not going to get double the work of a single honours degree. What it usually does mean is kind of it's a depth versus breadth thing a bit. So if you enjoy kind of having that range and that variety on some subjects, then you will get more of that potentially from a joint honours degree. So that you're working, for example, on philosophical logic if you're doing the maths and philosophy course on one part, and then you're solving problem sheets on the maths part on another part. Maybe if you're doing PPE, you're doing politics essay one week, and then you're doing an economics essay the other week. So it can give you a bit of variety if that's something that you like. But of course, it's not double the workload is the main thing that I'd like to emphasize there. The other thing that I want to point out on subject choice is I'm aware lots of you are already pretty certain on what subjects you want to study, and some of you are still a little unsure. I would really, really recommend looking at the Oxford and Cambridge course pages, because there are unique combinations of subjects that aren't offered more widely that might really appeal to you. So if you didn't know that mathematics and philosophy was a course option, if you didn't know that, for example, PPL, politics, philosophy, linguistics was a course option, and things like that, do have a look for some of those courses. If you're a humanities student that loves history and you love your languages and you love English, that's why I picked classics, because I could do all parts of that. So there are some course options on there that when you read, even if you've got kind of a clear idea in your mind, you might want to consider. That also comes with potential things to consider, that it's often the most vocational degrees, like your medicine, like your law, that have the most applicants per place, kind of 8 to 9 applicants per place. And maybe looking at something like biomedical sciences or the natural sciences tripos and picking psychology, if you're really interested in the brain specifically within medicine, could offer you different routes, or you could do PBS or something like that. So have a look at all of those courses. Even if you think you're certain, it can be a good exercise in critical thinking. So you can think, why have I picked the medicine course rather than biomedical sciences? And if someone asks me on that, now I can give an answer. So do have a think about things like that. Kaz says, am I right in thinking you can only apply to one of Oxford or Cambridge? If so, how do you pick? Yes, you're right, Kaz. So Oxford and Cambridge, you can only apply to one of those two as one of your 5 options on UCAS. So on UCAS, you can pick up to 5 universities in the country. We'll help you select those 5, but you can either pick Oxford or Cambridge. How do you pick? The first thing I would say is have a look at those course pages. There are some slight differences between the Oxford course and the Cambridge course. The links are all in the back of our booklet. And think, are there topics that appeal to me more? Sometimes an Oxford course starts general and goes specific, whereas the Cambridge course, you all have to do certain modules at the start, and then you go a bit broader and you get more options. So things like that can be important. The other thing I would say is some people prefer the feel of one of the universities over the other. I'm realizing I'm going to be on controversial ground here. Joyce went to Oxford, Nick and I went to Cambridge. There's always kind of a range. We're all going to say that our university was the best, of course, but there are some slightly different feels to the two places. I would say Oxford is a bit more built up. There's a bit more of a town around it. Cambridge is a bit more the specific university. That difference might appeal to some people. Have a look at things like that and try and get a feel. The best place to get a feel, if you can't go in person, which looks pretty unlikely at the moment, is to watch YouTube videos. People like Ibs Mo that I've linked in your study booklets, Eve Bennett, for example, for the Oxford one, having a look at some of those and seeing them just walking around the town can give you quite an interesting feel for the place as well. So that could be a good place to go. Just having a look at some of the other questions we have coming in. How do you choose what college you want to apply to when making an application to Oxford or Cambridge, says Joshua. So picking a college is something that we will cover in our booklet. And again, we've got some kind of tables to help with this. But to give you a rough idea, what I would say there is there are no good or bad colleges. So it can be quite easy to be distracted by two things called the Tompkins and the Norrington tables, which kind of rank colleges based on how many people in that year get a first and get a 2-1 from their university. That's something you can consider, but don't just think that if you go to the top college there, that's the best one, and the bottom college, you're not going to get a first. If you are the type of student who can get a first at any college, you're going to get one, to put it simply. All of the colleges are fantastic. Of course, St. Catherine's College, Cambridge is the best one, but not everyone can apply there. In terms of how I would go about picking it a bit further than that, have a look at a couple of other factors. So one of the things I looked at was the accommodation. So accommodation can vary quite hugely. There are some colleges that give students ensuite bathrooms. There are some colleges where you live with a couple of students sharing like a bathroom between 2 or sharing a bathroom between 7 or 8. That could be something that you want to consider when you pick on it. Some colleges have huge rooms that are a bit more expensive. Some colleges have more affordable, slightly smaller rooms. That could be something that's important to you to consider. Then the other thing is have a look at how many students are doing the same course as you at that college. Maybe you want to be part of a pretty small group of students, 2, 3, 4, studying that in your year at your college. Maybe you want to be part of a much bigger group. There are some subjects where there might only be you in your year studying that course if you apply to a particular college. So think about your preferences and things like that as well. And then also just try and get a feel for the college. See if you are it's the kind of place that you would enjoy being because you like the buildings, you like the architecture. There's loads of reasons. My favorite reason for someone picking a college, Sydney Sussex College at Cambridge, it was opposite Sainsbury's. So if he was ever short on milk, he could just pop across the road. That is an absolutely fine reason to pick a college as well, as far as I'm considered. And we'll help you with kind of things like that. And we'll introduce you to mentors who I'm sure will all rave about their own colleges. I think you can probably guess which one I went to from the comment I made a little earlier. So if we start looking around different courses and find one better suited to us other than the Oxbridge course, will we still receive support from OMS? Yes, is the short answer to that. So we are an Oxbridge specific scheme in that some of our preparation will be for things like the admissions test, the interviews that not every university does. But you're wrong. We're not going to boot you off the scheme if you suddenly now don't decide to apply to Oxbridge. What we would say as well is you don't have to apply to exactly the same course for all 5 of your UCAS university options. So it could be that at one university you're applying to PPE, Politics, Philosophy and Economics, which is an Oxford course. And then at other universities, you're just applying for politics or economics or international relations. That's fine too. And we'll help you with that and help you with the other university choices you might want to consider. Maria has a great question on open applications. So if you're not sure what an open application is, this is where, because you don't just pick the university, you pick that specific college. You say, I don't mind which college I get placed with. You can randomly assign one for me and I'll be interviewed by then. What I would say about this is people apply with open applications on the OMS each year and you're perfectly welcome to. It doesn't hugely advantage or disadvantage your application. I would always recommend picking a college. The reason why is because an open application you get randomly assigned, and the way it pretty much works is you probably get assigned one that had slightly less applicants than usual in 1 year. So I would say what it could be is, for example, if you're a woman, there are some all-girls colleges that still exist at Cambridge, and quite a lot of people who submit an open application might get one of them, and that might be something that you didn't actually want. And so just by submitting an open application, there is a chance that even if you didn't like just 1 or 2 colleges, they could be the one you end up with. Whereas by submitting a specific application, you guarantee that it's one, even if there's kind of 15 that you would have been happy with, you guarantee it's one that you are happy with, rather than that small chance you might get one that you weren't so happy with. So I would always lean in favor of picking a college, even if it is based on it's a short trip for milk, as the way to go forward. So what are the advantages of an open application, says Jal. In terms of the way that works, what I would say is basically what it does is it just means that you get assigned a college. So if you're really not sure how to pick, then it takes that stress away from the process. I would say that is the only main advantage. In terms of, you're not going to be disadvantaged if you apply to a particularly popular college and they don't have place. The way that works is they have something called a pooling system. So this happens if, let's say you apply to a college, they know you're of the right standard for Cambridge or Oxford, but they simply don't have any places because they've already offered them to other people who are already at the right standard as well. You'll be put in something called a pool. And what that means is other colleges, it's not a physical pool, don't worry, you're not like treading water waiting to find out. What that means though is other colleges can look at the application. Maybe they didn't have quite as many people who were of the standard that they had in other years, or didn't have many apply that year for whatever reason. They can look and say, right, Darwin, well, Darwin's not a good example because it's a grad college, but let's say Jesus College, Cambridge looked at your application and said you were the right standard, but they're already full. So we're going to take you out of that pool and give you an offer from our college. So that is another thing I would say about, if you're worried about it and you think an open application means that you'll definitely get one that's not oversubscribed, that pooling system means even if you apply to an oversubscribed one, you still have that chance of getting a place. So is the info about colleges on the websites? Yes. The best way I would recommend this, we could put all the links in there, but quite simply just Google the colleges that interest you. So type in Jesus College, Cambridge on Google, type in Merton College, Oxford on Google, and then just have a look there. The student room gives you a bit of insider information as well on what it's like at those colleges. We've linked that in the back of our booklet. It will tell you about some of the unique features of those colleges, whether they have a pool table in one of their rooms. My college had a PS4, for example, things like that that are actually important in terms of your downtime as well. All of the colleges have great teaching facilities, so you can base it on things like, does it have the sports facilities or music facilities that you want? If you don't study the subject at A-level you want to pick at uni, how do you pick your written work? That's a really good question. What I would say is try and pick something that kind of shows you thinking in a creative way. So if you're, for example, studying a humanities subject at A-level that you're not picking at university, pick one that shows off your essay writing skills if it's still an essay subject, for example, so that they can see that style of thinking. They won't assess any of your submitted work in the ways of just looking at the content, what you know. They're looking about how you write and how you think, and that goes for the whole process. So another little thing I would say there is it doesn't necessarily have to be the best piece of work you've done all year. What it should be is something that you'll be interested in discussing and that you still find room to improve. Again, that common question, what would you do differently if you could do it again, is something you should prepare for. So if you submit something that you've changed 4 times since it's been marked and kind of think is the perfect piece of work, it might not actually be the best thing for you. You might want to consider what's still there to improve. Jazz, I've seen a question about classics. Sorry, I said I would go all general. Yes, I am very happy to answer classics specific questions. Submit them via the portal and I will be able to help there. Music students, other specific genres and things like that as well. What I would say is our mentors can help with specific questions at various webinars. These webinars are a great opportunity for specific questions when you begin being divided up. But for pretty much all of them, they won't expect or test knowledge of certain topics. So an interview question, what they'll do is they might start you on something a bit familiar. They might say to you, why do you want to study this course? Tell me about this thing that's happened quite recently in the news, or this thing that you mentioned in your personal statement. That could be one way they start. But what really matters is they're not looking at the knowledge that you provide there. They're looking at the way you think about it. And they will eventually stretch you to a point in that interview where you're covering content that you're not familiar with. That's the point of the interview. They want to see how you can react based on that unfamiliar scenario, that content that might be slightly known from A-levels, but really you've not seen this question before. And then they want to see how you think about that. So that's the main thing I would emphasize there on the interviews, that it's about a style of thinking. So you don't really need to revise specific topics. What you need to revise are things like our learning frameworks, ways that you can approach that style of thinking at the interview. And I mean, later in the process, we'll do some exact interview questions and things like that. But I know they're always popular, and the newspapers can sometimes take them out of context. You won't just walk in, sit down, and they go, how many ants would fit in the wings of a Boeing 747? It doesn't work like that. There's always a context to the questions, and they'll kind of build up and work in a way that encourages you to think slightly differently. Do GCSEs affect your chances of getting into Oxbridge a lot? There has been I know we sent out kind of some specific emails on this to people about this. What I would say is, usually I feel a lot more confident answering this question. This last year has been mad for so many of us in terms of education, everything else. And we're not quite sure how Oxbridge will approach grades this year in terms of how much weight. As a betting man, what I would say is I think they're going to put a lot more emphasis on their own internal tests, things like the admissions tests in November, in terms of how much weight they carry, because they can control and run those tests. So I think they will be a pretty important part of the process. A-levels they'll still ask for the predicted grades written on the websites. So if you don't quite have those grades right now, don't worry about that. There are always chances to improve them, and you're not going to get flat out rejected if you're being predicted grades that don't immediately stack up with the grades that are being offered. But if you are falling quite a way short, or your GCSEs, you've got quite a few grades that are quite short, this is something to consider now, because these universities are competitive. So what I would say there is it's still just one option of 5, and I would still highly recommend applying and everything like that. But do manage expectations there. If you are falling quite a way short, or you don't think that you're going to be able to achieve that submitted grade that they're highlighting there, have a think about what that might mean, and have a reflection on the application process there. We can always help with those decisions as well. I've flagged it in some specific emails to a couple of people if we want you to consider it. Again, that email, please don't try and read between that lines in the email. That email is not saying do apply, don't apply. That email is simply saying this is something to be aware of. We want you to know it now. Do Oxbridge have a cap on how many people from one school get in? No, is the simple answer to that. Oxbridge screen their applications blind as much as possible. So what that means is they could accept, if 4 of you from the same college all applied, you could all get accepted. That would be absolutely fine. What we tend to recommend on the OMS is you're all going to get a kind of a level of support from us. So we do try and space you out a bit. The reason why is we don't want you directly competing against each other. We want you competing against strangers and people who haven't had exactly the same advice. So hopefully those who haven't had such fantastic preparation that we offer on the OMS are the ones who don't get in, rather than your fellow OMS competitors or something like that. We work in a collaborative way. So we will try and space you out so that, for example, all of our medicine applicants don't apply to one college at one specific university. We will space that out, and we will help you with that. And again, if you still choose to apply to that college, you can. We're not going to tell you you can and can't. We'll just let you know and make you aware that if you are applying to a particularly popular college for the same subject, that is a factor. Of course, if you're applying to the same college for different subjects, doesn't matter at all. It's only for the same college, the same subject, the same university that we might advise in that case. I'm interested in getting involved with the local Green Party. Yes, that definitely helps your chances on the application. I think any kind of extracurricular, volunteering, involvement that you can provide at the moment, those are great things to mention in your personal statement. They'll never look on it badly, even if it's politically orientated. They'll never look at it and go, that's not the right kind of politics for me, or I don't agree with that, so I'm not going to give them a place. No, they work all of that completely fairly. Natural sciences question, do have a look on the course website. So type in natural sciences at Cambridge, look at the entry requirements, and it will give you a full breakdown of the syllabus and kind of some of the various modules. A big difference there, just to kind of briefly outline it, at Oxford, you apply to the individual sciences like biology, chemistry, physics, biochemistry, something like that. At Cambridge, they're all grouped under this big umbrella called natural sciences, where you can then begin to specialize in different parts of that, but you get that broad basis at the start. So it goes back to some of those differences between the Oxford and Cambridge course. And if you want to see what those specific modules of natural sciences involve, do take a look on the Cambridge website. It's all linked in the back of your booklet, or you can type it in directly on Google if you find that easier. I'm loving the upvotes for the Green Party. That's great. Then, does doing D of E Gold help your application? Great question, Ashley. In the 5th paragraph of your personal statement, we encourage you to talk about things like D of E, extracurriculars and things like that. What I would say is they won't look at the exact thing and go, great, that's going to get them in. Okay. It doesn't matter whether it's D of E Gold. It doesn't matter if you won a competition or whether you came 5th or 50th in a competition. What matters again is how you reflect on that, what you learned from it. What did D of E teach you about resilience? What did D of E teach you about the way that you can kind of persevere through adversity? That would be the thing that you would mention in it potentially, or cooperation, rather than necessarily the exact award of what it is. There are a couple of very small exceptions for that. Things like the UK Maths Challenge and things like that, I would say they are great things to feature if you do very well in that. There are some colleges that look on that quite fondly, but I wouldn't get too hung up on that. We can deal with that on a case-by-case basis. Just having a look at some of the other questions. Do Cambridge ever give reduced offers or special considerations? Yes, Rachel, they do. Cambridge have actually just released a fantastic scheme this year when they're going to offer some places with much reduced and unconditional offers to people from certain backgrounds. So that's one thing that can definitely be featured. And speaking for Oxford as well, both of them do take into account circumstances. So if you've had medical disruptions and things like that, they will definitely take that into account and be able to give reduced offers and special considerations there. The one exception I say to that is if it's a generic school was shut due to COVID and it didn't kind of have a specific very negative, for example, if you have long COVID, definitely an extra extenuating circumstance and things like that. If you've had kind of family members who have been very severely affected by COVID-19 or your family has been, that's of course an extenuating circumstance. If your extenuating circumstances is I haven't got as much teaching as usual due to COVID-19, we would say that pretty much everyone has been in the same boat there. So that wouldn't potentially count, but other medical disruptions, everything like that, there are lots of considerations there. And there's an extra form you can fill in that helps with that. If you want to continue your education to a master's level, could you mention this? Yes, you can always mention that you want to carry on to further study and things like that. It's great to mention in your personal statement. What I would say is it shouldn't be the focus. Your focus, I want you to think about it in sequence. So kind of, if you're here at school now, the next step on the ladder is your undergraduate degree. And so that's what the focus of that personal statement should be. It could be a little line you throw in there that you're interested in further study. They always love to see it. What they want to primarily see is that passion for your undergraduate course rather than for a master's. What ways can I make myself stand out when writing an application? So we'll come on to this a lot in the summer, but I think one of the things that you can definitely do to stand out, and I've mentioned this in various forms, is on that balance between knowledge and the way you go about that learning. People won't stand out just by having more knowledge. Of course, they'll expect a base level. They'll expect you to have done some relevant subjects. They'll expect you to have read around your course. But they're not looking to test that, because lots of the applicants who apply do have that. What they're looking to see is, if you get accepted, that person who's interviewing you or who's reading your application will be sitting in a room with you and maybe one other student once a week for 3 up to 6 years, depending on your degree. They only want to do that if they like the person that they see in front of them. They don't want a brain box who claims to know it all already, who goes, oh yes, I knew that, when they mention it, and it kind of tries to come across like they know all this stuff. What they want is teachability. Someone who's not afraid to go, I hadn't thought about that before, so I'm going to take a moment to think about it. And this is my response. This is my reaction. That's the way you can stand out, by showing teachability. And if you're writing that in your application, thinking about that, I went into a topic with this appreciation, and then I read this person's book, or I did this problem, and it showed me a new way to view that. It opened up the topic in a new light to me. That's showing your ability to learn. It's showing your teachability, because I guarantee you, these universities are fantastic. These are the world-leading professors, and they are going to open a lot of doors there to new ways of thinking. So that's what they want to see. Will we have access to the example personal statements? Yes, in the summer, we will give you access to them. I can see a couple of people talking about various sports and things like that. Those are always great things that you can mention in your application. It's good to have sport in there. Oxford and Cambridge, the majority of the focus is academic, but they do want to see that you do something that's not work. They don't want people who could virtually live in the library, okay? That's not how these universities work. They want people who are going to provide a rounded university experience and get involved with all of the things that they have on offer. To give you an example again, my college had a smoothie society on Sundays. There were other colleges I know. One had a Tiddlywinks society. I mean, there's societies for anything you can imagine under the sun, or if not, you can probably set one up. So they want to see that you're going to do things that aren't just purely academic. I would stay away from cracking jokes in your interview B. There'll be plenty of opportunities for cracking jokes on the OMS. I have a notoriously awful dad joke sense of humor, but yeah, probably not for the interview. So how would you use the exemplar personal statements without copying? Again, kind of a couple of questions on the personal statements there. What I would say mainly there is they're to inspire you. They're for you to think about ways that you can approach something, and then you'll have this main structure, but you can put in your own experiences and your own opportunities. So I think by that stage, you will have already had your own experiences and opportunities that will be completely different and unique to you. So that's one way that it would help. So a couple of questions on kind of like, what if you're doing like some subjects that do well in and a couple of subjects that you're really struggling in? What I would say there is it doesn't just impress Oxbridge if you're doing 4 A-levels. What I would actually recommend in some cases, and I know this is a very specific case, is it's definitely not going to advantage your application just by having 4 rather than 3. That's not going to change your offer. So if you really are struggling with one, discuss it with your teachers, and it might be worth just submitting 3, because they're not going to ask for A star, F, just because you don't like the 3rd one. What it will be is it will be asking for another A or something like that. Cool. I can see someone asking about teaching. That's a great option as well. There are great education courses at both universities. So Lottie, yeah, everyone in this call is specific to OMS self-study. So there is a main program as well. I wouldn't worry too much about that. This is specific for self-study. So all of these sessions will be self-study specific. If you are on the main program and watching this, you can do, but I mean, there was a specific webinar for you and the same vice versa. So I'd always recommend attending the specific webinars for you guys, because it'll have more tailored information for what you need. Brilliant. So I'm aware we've been going for just over the hour now. So the last couple of things that I want to mention is in terms of the best stages of what you can do now, since you've kind of worked through your applications and now that you've got access to that self-study portal. After this session, if you haven't already, what I would recommend doing is going and taking a look at that self-study syllabus and taking a look at the booklet there that will give you an introduction to the course. So have a read of them, have a look at some of our learning frameworks, and maybe pick up on some of the tips that we've been giving from today that could enhance your application. So if you're not sure about course choices, maybe start having a look in there and spacing out some of your preparation and so on. Those are the main places I would advise to start now, and we will be in touch going forwards in terms of organizing the next sets of webinars, and also when those reading lists go live, we'll notify you by email, but keep an eye on those portals. I'm aware the sun is probably telling me I should stop because it's streaming right in through my face now, but have a lovely rest of your weekend, everyone. It's really good to welcome you to the self-study program, and we wish you all of the best in your preparations for it. So see you all again very soon.